Charity cases eat last. Those 4 words spoken by my 10-year-old nephew hung in the humid Atlanta air like a death sentence. He did not come up with that phrase on his own. He was a child, a parrot repeating the poison his parents fed him at the dinner table. I froze my hand, hovering over a paper plate of potato salad, while my entire family erupted into laughter. They laughed because they thought it was true. They laughed because they saw me, Nia, the 34-year-old spinster, in a simple linen dress as the family failure. They saw a woman who drove a 5-year-old sedan and refused to wear Gucci belts with logos the size of dinner plates. They thought I was broke. They thought I needed their pity. What they did not know, what none of them knew, was that the simple linen dress I was wearing cost more than my brother's entire wardrobe combined. They did not know that the sedan was a choice, not a necessity. And they certainly did not know that I, the so-called charity case, had just closed a deal to acquire the bank that held the mortgage on this very house. I looked at my nephew, then at my brother Marcus, who was wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. I carefully set the paper plate down. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply smiled, the kind of cold, terrifying smile that you see on a shark before it drags you under. Before I tell you how I evicted my own family and watched their empire of lies crumble, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the shepherd in disguise. My name is Nia, and this is the story of how I turned their laughter into a silence so loud it shattered their lives. Let me take you back to that afternoon. It was the 4th of July, and the heat in the backyard was suffocating. My parents' house has always been a shrine to appearances. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life, the pool was sparkling with chemicals, and the air smelled of hickory smoke and desperation. My father Desmond stood by the grill flipping ribs like he was the king of a castle he actually owned, instead of a man drowning in a second mortgage. Then there was my brother Marcus. At 38, Marcus was still the golden boy. He wore a gold chain that was too thick and a watch that ticked too loudly, desperate to prove he was a CEO. He was always launching a new startup, always one investor away from being the next tech mogul. And sitting next to him, sipping a mimosa with her pinky finger extended, was his wife Tiffany. Tiffany is white, a lifestyle influencer with 50,000 followers who think her life is perfect. She looked at me from behind her oversized sunglasses, her eyes scanning my outfit with a mixture of pity and disdain. She leaned over to Marcus and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "It is sweet that she came. I hope she does not ask for gas money again." I felt the heat rise up my neck. I have never asked them for gas money. In fact, 3 months ago, I anonymously paid off the credit card Tiffany maxed out at Nordstrom so my parents would not find out. But that is the role they assigned me, the struggler, the cautionary tale. I walked toward the food table feeling the weight of their judgment. I was the forensic accountant who tracked down billions in hidden assets for Fortune 500 companies, but here in this backyard, I was just Nia the disappointment. The humidity in Atlanta that day felt less like weather and more like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. It was 95 degrees in the shade, but my mother insisted on hosting the barbecue outside because she wanted the neighbors to see the new patio furniture. Furniture that I knew for a fact was purchased on a payment plan with 20% interest. My father Desmond stood manning the massive stainless steel grill like the captain of a ship. He was sweating through his linen shirt, focused entirely on a rack of prime ribs. I watched from the sliding glass door as he carefully selected the thickest, juiciest cuts. With a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts, he placed the best meat on a ceramic plate and handed it to Marcus. "Here you go, son," my father boomed, his voice loud enough for the people 3 houses down to hear. "You need your strength. Being a CEO takes energy." Marcus accepted the plate without a thank you, just nodding as he shoveled a forkful of potato salad into his mouth. He looked bloated and tired, but in my parents' eyes, he was a king. When I finally stepped out onto the patio, the atmosphere shifted instantly. It was subtle but undeniable, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. Tiffany was the first to notice me. She was lounging on a chaise by the pool holding a glass of sangria. She lowered her sunglasses and let her eyes drag over my outfit. I was wearing a simple beige linen set, breathable and understated. To her it probably looked like something from a discount rack. "Oh, Nia," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You made it. We were betting you would be working on a holiday. You know all work and no play makes you age faster." She took a sip of her drink and turned her back to me, giggling with her friends. I walked toward the food hoping to grab a plate before the confrontation started. My father blocked the prime ribs with his tongs. "Whoa, hold on there, Nia," he said, not making eye contact. "Those are for the guests and the men. There are some hot dogs left on the warmer tray. Grab yourself one of those." I looked at the shriveled hot dogs, then at the mountain of meat on Marcus's plate. I said nothing. I just took a hot dog and looked for a place to sit. The main table was full set with cloth napkins and crystal glasses. My mother busied herself arranging flowers, pretending not to see me standing there with my paper plate. Finally, she gestured vaguely toward the edge of the yard near the overgrown azalea bushes. "We made a spot for you over there, baby," she said. I looked where she pointed. Sitting alone in the dirt was a white plastic lawn chair. One of its legs was wrapped in gray duct tape and it leaned precariously to the left. That was my place. While they feasted at the table paid for by the second mortgage on a house I helped save, I was relegated to the broken chair in the weeds. I sat on that wobbly plastic chair for 20 minutes, watching them eat. My stomach rumbled, a traitorous reminder that I had skipped lunch to finish a client report. The smell of the barbecue sauce was taunting me, sweet and smoky in the heavy air. Finally, pride gave way to hunger. I told myself I would just grab a few wings and go back to my corner. I stood up and walked back to the main table. The conversation died down as I approached, but I ignored the sudden silence. I picked up a clean paper plate and reached for the tongs near the chicken wings. They were glazed and golden, the only thing left that was not picked over. Just as my hand closed around the metal tongs, a blur of motion stopped me. It was Trey. My 10-year-old nephew, a boy I had bought a PlayStation for last Christmas, snatched the paper plate right out of my other hand. He did not look like a child in that moment. He looked like a miniature security guard. "No, Auntie Nia," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent patio, like a judge reading a verdict. I froze, staring at him. "Excuse me, Trey." He pointed a greasy finger at the salad bowl, which contained nothing but wilted iceberg lettuce and a few sad croutons. "Mom Tiffany said, you did not contribute money for the meat," he recited, clearly repeating a script he had been fed earlier. "So you eat salad. Meat is for the people who pay." I looked at Tiffany. She did not look away. She did not scold him. She took a bite of her corn on the cob, eyes twinkling with malicious amusement. I looked at my mother, expecting her to intervene to teach her grandson some manners. Instead, she was busy wiping invisible crumbs off the table, pretending to be deaf. Then the laughter started. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a full-bellied roar from my brother Marcus. He reached out and high-fived his son hard enough to make a slapping sound. "That is my boy Marcus," crowed, wiping barbecue sauce from his chin. "Good job, son. You have to know how to protect the assets. Never let the overhead eat into the profits." The rest of the table joined in. My cousins, my aunt, even my father let out a chuckle, shaking his head as if Trey had just told a clever joke. They thought it was adorable. They thought watching a 10-year-old humiliate his aunt was a lesson in economics. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold despite the heat. It was not about the chicken. It was about the indoctrination. They were teaching this child to despise me. They were teaching him that my worth was tied to what I could provide for them in that exact moment. I looked at Trey's face. He was beaming, soaking up his father praise. He did not hate me. He just wanted to be like them. And that was the tragedy. I looked at the empty spot where my plate had been. I looked at the wilted salad. A coldness settled over me, heavier than the humidity. I realized then that I was not just an outsider. I was the enemy. And if I was the enemy, then I had no business eating their food. I slowly retracted my hand from the tongs. I did not reach for the salad. I did not say a word to Trey. I just looked at Marcus. Really looked at him, capturing a mental image of his greasy, laughing face. Enjoy the meat, Marcus, I thought. It is the last meal you will ever eat on my dime. The laughter around the table did not stop all at once. It died down, slowly flickering out like a candle in a drafty room. They stopped laughing because I did not react the way they expected. I did not cry. I did not hang my head in shame. And I certainly did not storm off in a huff of emotional instability. Instead, I stood up. I moved with a deliberate slowness that seemed to suck the air out of the patio. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and looked down at them. Marcus was still grinning, but his eyes darted back and forth nervously. Tiffany had lowered her drink, her smile freezing into a mask of confusion. They were waiting for the explosion. They wanted the drama so they could call me crazy later. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I picked up the paper plate containing the sad, wilted salad that Trey had pointed to. I held it in my hand for a moment as if inspecting a rare artifact. Then I walked over to the expensive stainless steel trash can positioned near the grill. It was a slow walk. Every eye in the yard was glued to me. I could hear the hum of the pool filter and the distant sound of traffic, but in that backyard there was only a suffocating silence. I depressed the pedal of the trash can with my heel. The lid opened with a soft hiss. I tilted the plate. The lettuce slid into the garbage bag with a wet slap. I dropped the paper plate in after it. I dusted my hands off as if I had just touched something filthy. Then I turned back to face them. "Tiffany," I said, my voice steady and low, cutting through the humidity. "You are absolutely right. I should not be eating here." I paused, letting them think I was accepting defeat. Tiffany smirked, ready to accept my surrender. Then I delivered the blow. "I have a strict policy against eating food provided by people who are technically insolvent." The smirk fell off Tiffany's face so fast it was almost comical. She dropped her fork and it clattered loudly against the patio stones. Marcus stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the concrete. "What did you just say to my wife?" he demanded, his chest puffing out in fake outrage. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked him dead in the eye. "You heard me, Marcus. I checked the public records this morning. Foreclosure notices are public information." I gestured vaguely at the spread of food. "Enjoy the ribs. I hope they taste like freedom because judging by your credit score, you are about to lose everything else." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked toward the side gate. Behind me, I heard Marcus sputtering, trying to find words, and my mother gasping his name. But I did not look back. I reached the gate and unlatched it. The metal click of the latch closing behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault door closing. It was the sound of a bridge burning. I walked to my car, my head held high, leaving them to choke on their barbecue and their secrets. My hands were steady as I unlocked my sedan. It was an old Honda, reliable and unassuming, just like me. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, creating a barrier between me and the toxicity radiating from that backyard. I started the engine, the air conditioning blasting against my flushed skin. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the house behind, but the ghost of my father followed me. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I knew who it was before I even looked. It was a text from Dad. I pulled over into a church parking lot down the street to read it. I needed to see the audacity in writing. The message popped up on the screen. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated your brother in front of his wife. Come back and apologize immediately." I stared at the screen, waiting for the apology that I deserved. It never came. Instead, a second message appeared. Bubbles popped up indicating he was typing a long paragraph. "And since you are acting so high and mighty, Marcus Company has a cash flow issue. We need $50,000 for a bridge loan by tomorrow morning. Mom is stressed. Do not kill your mother with your selfishness. Send the wire." I laughed. A dry, humorless sound that echoed in the empty car. $50,000. They did not just want an apology. They wanted a ransom. They treated me like a broken ATM that they could kick until it spit out cash. They called it a loan, but we all knew what it was. It was a tribute payment, a tax for being part of the family. I looked at the timestamp. He wanted the money by 9 a.m. He assumed I would panic. He assumed I would crumble under the guilt of making my mother stressed. That was their favorite weapon. My mother's health was always fragile whenever they needed money, but miraculously robust whenever they went on vacation. I read the message one last time, letting the words burn into my retina. Do not kill your mother with your selfishness. The gaslighting was professional grade. They were blaming me for a heart attack that had not happened yet to extort money for a business that did not exist. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not see the scared little girl they thought they were texting. I saw a woman who had just managed a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I saw a woman who was done paying for love that was never real. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. $50,000. That was the cost of my freedom. And I decided right then and there that I was not paying it. Not this time. Not ever again. I sat there in the empty church parking lot, listening to the engine idle. The air conditioning hummed a steady rhythm against the chaotic beating of my heart. It was not just the $50,000, it was the principle. I closed my eyes, and the receipts flashed behind my eyelids like a tragic movie reel. 10 years. For 10 years, I had been the silent foundation of this house of cards. I remembered the 3 jobs I worked in grad school, not to pay my own tuition, but to pay off Marcus' gambling debts so his kneecaps would not get broken. I remembered the down payment I provided for my parents' retirement home, which they immediately refinanced to buy a boat I was never invited on. I remembered the late nights staring at spreadsheets, my eyes burning just to ensure there was enough liquidity to cover their mistakes. They called it family duty. I called it financial parasitism. They did not love me. They loved my utility. To them, I was not Nia the person. I was Nia the safety deposit box. And the moment the box refused to open, they did not ask what was wrong. They just kicked it harder. I looked down at the glowing screen. The cursor blinked, waiting for my submission, waiting for the usual apology. The usual transfer confirmation number. Instead, I typed 2 words. 2 words that weighed more than the check they were demanding. Never again. I did not add an exclamation point. I did not add a sad emoji. The sentiment was absolute. I pressed send. I watched the delivered status appear. Then before they could reply with more guilt or rage, I began the purge. I opened my father contact. The man who taught me to ride a bike and then taught me that his love had a price tag. Scroll down, block caller. I opened my mother contact. The woman who birthed me, but only praised me when my check cleared. Block caller. Marcus. The golden boy who is actually fool's gold. Block caller. And finally Tiffany. The outsider who had weaponized my family against me. Block caller. The phone went silent. No more buzzing, no more demands. Just the quiet hum of the car and the sound of my own breathing. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. The rearview mirror was empty. For the first time in my life, I was not looking back. The drive back to the city was a decompression chamber, leaving the suffocating suburbs behind for the steel and glass sanctuary of downtown Atlanta. My building was a fortress of privacy, where the doorman knew my name, but never my business, and the elevator required a biometric scan to reach the penthouse floor. I stepped inside my apartment and felt the tension finally begin to bleed out of my shoulders. The space was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the heat and noise of my parents' backyard. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline that I helped shape through my investments. I was safe here, or so I thought. I sat down on my velvet sofa and reached for my iPad, intending to read a book, but a notification banner dropped down from the top of the screen. It was an alert from Instagram. Tiffany Jackson is live. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. I knew I should ignore it, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I tapped the notification. The screen filled with Tiffany's face. She was sitting in her car, the unnatural glow of a ring light reflecting in her teary eyes. She was not wearing the smug expression she had at the barbecue. Now she was wearing the mask of a victim. "Hey guys," she sniffled, wiping away a tear that I was 90% sure was produced by eye drops. "I do not usually do this. I try to keep my family life private because family is everything to me." She paused for dramatic effect, looking away from the camera, as if too overcome with emotion to speak. But today was just too much. We invited my sister-in-law Nia to our family barbecue. We tried to include her even though she has always been difficult. She looked directly into the camera, her voice trembling. She screamed at my son. She threw food at us. She told us she hopes we starve. All because we asked her to help out a little with the family expenses. I watched in horror as the comment section flooded with hearts and angry emojis. Total strangers were typing things like "she sounds toxic" and "protect your peace, mama." Tiffany continued her performance effortlessly, weaving a narrative where she was the saint, and I was the bitter, jealous spinster. "It is hard, you know," she whispered. "It is hard when you welcome someone into your life and they just hate you because you are happy. She is jealous of my marriage. She is jealous of our success." I set the wine glass down on the marble coffee table with a sharp clink. The audacity was breathtaking. She was using her platform to assassinate my character, to rewrite history before I could even open my mouth. She was weaponizing her white woman tears against me, playing into every stereotype to garner sympathy. A younger version of me would have created a burner account to argue in the comments. A younger version of me would have called her screaming. But I was not that woman anymore. I closed the Instagram app. I did not report the video. I did not share it. I simply stood up and walked into my home office. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up my 3-monitor setup. If Tiffany wanted to talk about finances and contributions, I was ready to have that conversation. But we were not going to have it in the comment section. I pulled up my secure server and opened a new file. I named it Jackson Family Audit. It was time to see exactly where all that money I gave them had gone. And I had a feeling the truth was going to be far more damaging than any Instagram story could ever be. I walked into my master bedroom, which is larger than the entire ground floor of my parents' house. I stripped off the beige linen clothes that smelled like barbecue smoke and betrayal. I let them fall to the floor in a heap. I walked into my walk-in closet, a space filled with tailored suits from Milan and shoes with red bottoms that I only wore when I was out of the state. I reached for a robe made of raw silk, the kind that feels like cool water against your skin. I tied the sash tight around my waist and walked barefoot across the heated marble floors. This is the Nia they do not know. To my family, I am just a vague administrative assistant who works for a boring firm downtown. I let them believe that. I let them believe my car is 5 years old because I cannot afford a Tesla, not because I prefer to move through the world unseen. The truth is far more dangerous. I am a forensic accountant. I am the person Fortune 500 companies call when the numbers do not add up. I am the person divorce lawyers hire when a billionaire husband claims he is broke. I do not just do math. I hunt. I track digital footprints through shell companies and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I can look at a spreadsheet and tell you exactly who is lying within 5 minutes. My starting retainer is $20,000. Last year alone, I cleared more than Marcus has made in his entire life. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the glittering skyline of Atlanta. A lot of people ask why I hide it. Why play the poor relation? The answer is simple. Money changes people, but it changes family the most. They treated me like a servant when they thought I made $40,000 a year. Imagine what they would do if they knew my net worth was in the 8 figures. They would not just ask for $50,000. They would feel entitled to everything I have built. They would sue me. They would guilt-trip me. They would consume me until there was nothing left. So I became a ghost. I built a fortress of mediocrity around my success to protect myself from their greed. I let them laugh at my old car so I could drive my Porsche on the weekends in peace. I let them mock my simple clothes so I could wear couture to galas they were not invited to. But tonight, the disguise was coming off. Not for them to see, but for me to use. I walked back to my desk and sat down in my ergonomic chair. The three monitors hummed to life, casting a blue glow over my face. I looked at the file open on my screen, labeled Jackson Family Audit. For years I used my skills to help strangers find justice. Now I was going to use them to dissect my own flesh and blood. Marcus thought he was a businessman playing the system. He had no idea he was playing against the person who designed the game. I took a sip of water and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go to work. I reached for my secure phone and dialed the number for my personal asset manager. It was 10 o'clock at night, but when you pay someone a six-figure salary to manage your life, they answer on the first ring. David picked up immediately, his voice crisp and professional. "Good evening, Ms. Nia. How can I help you?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor blink on my screen. "David, I need to access the tertiary account. The one labeled Family Support." There was a brief pause on the line. David knew that account well. It was a black hole that sucked in $5,000 a month for the last 5 years. I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. "I need you to cancel all standing automatic payments associated with that account. Effective immediately." I could hear the clicking of his keyboard in the background. "Just to confirm, Ms. Nia, that includes the residential utilities for the property on Oak Street, the Georgia Power bill, the water and sewage, and the premium cable package." "Yes, David. Cancel them all." "And David, yes ma'am, cancel the membership dues for the Rolling Hills Country Club." That one felt the best. My father, Desmond, loved that country club. He spent every Saturday morning there playing golf with men he tried to impress, wearing polo shirts he could not afford. He told everyone he was a legacy member. He told everyone his business was booming. The truth was, I had been quietly paying his $2,000 monthly dues since 2019, just so he could keep up appearances. I did it to protect his pride. I did it because I thought if I made him feel like a big man, maybe he would finally have enough room in his heart to love his daughter. I was wrong. Silence on the line as David processed the request. "Okay, the utility companies have been notified. Since the bills are 3 months overdue under their names and you were just covering the balance, the shut-off orders will be automatic. The power should be cut by tomorrow afternoon. The water will follow shortly after. And the country club membership has been terminated. They will likely be denied entry at the gate by this weekend. Thank you, David. That will be all." I hung up the phone and set it face down on the desk. A dark satisfaction curled in my gut. It was cruel, perhaps, but it was necessary. For years, my family lived in a fantasy world where electricity was free and water just flowed, and country club memberships were a God-given right. They never asked how the bills got paid. They never saw the statements. They just assumed that the world owed them comfort. They called me a charity case while living inside a life that was entirely subsidized by my charity. I looked at the city lights outside my window. Tomorrow night, when the sun went down, their house would be dark. The pool pump would stop humming. The cable TV would turn to static. And for the first time in a decade, they would have to sit in the quiet and face the reality they had been running from. They wanted me out of their lives. Fine. I was taking my electricity, my water, and my money with me. Let us see how much they enjoy the darkness. I opened a new window on my browser and navigated to the parent portal for St. Stephen's Academy. This was the hardest move yet. Cutting off the cable was petty. Cutting off the power was practical. But this involved a child. I stared at the logo of the school, a shield, with a lion and a cross, representing excellence and tradition. I had pulled strings to get Trey into the school. I paid the $30,000 annual tuition up front every August so Marcus and Tiffany could brag about their son being a legacy student. I did it because I wanted Trey to have a chance. I wanted him to be around people who valued hard work, not just appearances. But at the barbecue, I realized that St. Stephen's was not saving him. It was just another accessory for his parents to flaunt. And he was already becoming them. Charity cases eat last. The voice of my 10-year-old nephew echoed in my head, drowning out my hesitation. If I kept paying, I was not helping him. I was funding the creation of another Marcus. I clicked on the financial aid tab and selected the option for third-party sponsorship. My name was listed as the sole guarantor. I clicked the edit button. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a split second. Then I typed. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing my financial sponsorship for student Trey Jackson. Please direct all future invoices to the legal guardians Marcus and Tiffany Jackson. I hit submit. The screen refreshed showing a balance due of $30,000. I knew exactly what would happen next. The school had a zero-tolerance policy for unpaid accounts. At 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the bursar Mrs. Abernathy would open this notification. She was a stern woman who cared about endowments, not excuses. She would pick up the phone and dial Tiffany's number. I imagined the scene vividly. Tiffany would be hungover from her night of victimhood, probably scrolling through sympathetic comments on her Instagram. The phone would ring. She would answer, expecting it to be a friend. Instead, she would hear Mrs. Abernathy's cold voice informing her that unless the full tuition was wired by close of business today, Trey would be administratively withdrawn. He would lose his spot. He would lose his status. And most importantly, Tiffany would lose the ability to post pictures of him in his blazer with the school crest. It was a nuclear strike on her social standing. I closed the laptop. The guilt tried to creep in, the old habit of protecting them, but I pushed it down. Trey needed to learn that education is a privilege, not a right. And his parents needed to learn that if they wanted to raise a prince, they needed to pay for the castle themselves. The safety net was gone. It was time for them to fall. I did not need to be a fly on the wall to visualize the chaos that erupted at my parents' house. I knew their routine perfectly. At exactly midnight, the automated systems I had subsidized for half a decade simply ceased to exist. The first thing to go was the air conditioning. In the humid Atlanta summer, silence is not golden, it is suffocating. The hum of the compressor died, and the house began to cook. I imagined Tiffany was the first to notice. She is nocturnal, existing on a diet of blue light and social validation. When the Wi-Fi router went dark, cutting off her connection to the digital world, she likely panicked. I could picture her stumbling through the pitch-black hallway, screaming for Marcus, screaming that the internet was broken, not realizing that the darkness was total. My father Desmond would have woken up in a sweat, reaching for the bedside lamp that refused to turn on. He would be cursing the city infrastructure, blaming the mayor, blaming the weather, blaming everything except the fact that he had not paid a utility bill since the Obama administration. He would stumble to the breaker box, flipping switches in a futile attempt to command electricity that he did not own. But the most delicious part of the evening was happening 5 miles away at the Onyx Lounge. Marcus was doing what Marcus does best, which is spending money he did not earn to impress people he did not like. He was likely surrounded by potential investors for his non-existent tech company, buying rounds of Don Julio 1942. I can see the scene clearly. The bartender, a woman who had seen 1,000 pretenders like him, slid the black American Express card into the chip reader. That card was an authorized user card on my account. For years, I paid the balance without looking because I wanted my brother to feel successful. But tonight, the terminal beeped a sharp, angry rejection. Declined. Marcus would have laughed it off, blaming the chip, telling the bartender to run it again. She did. Declined. Insufficient funds. Account closed. The silence at the bar would have been louder than the music. The investors would exchange glances. The bartender would ask for another form of payment. And Marcus would realize with a sinking feeling in his gut that he did not have another form of payment. He pulled out his phone to call me, to scream at me to fix it. But the call failed. Blocked. He tried to call the house, but the landline was dead. He was stranded in a bar with a $400 tab and zero leverage. The safety net was not just gone. It had been replaced by a trapdoor, and they were all falling into the dark. I poured another cup of chamomile tea and set my phone on speaker. On the other end of the line was Keisha, my best friend, and the current senior office manager at Sterling and Finch, where I used to work 3 years ago. She was laughing so hard she could barely breathe. "Girl, you missed the performance of a lifetime," she wheezed. I took a sip of tea, my pulse calm for the first time in days. "Tell me everything," I said, leaning back against the velvet cushions of my sofa. Keisha composed herself and began the play-by-play. Apparently at 9 o'clock sharp, my father Desmond marched into the marble lobby of my old corporate firm. He was wearing his Sunday suit, the one with the shiny lapels that he thinks makes him look like a senator. He was carrying a briefcase that I know for a fact contains nothing but old newspapers and breath mints. He walked right up to the front desk, bypassing the security check-in, and slammed his hand on the counter. He demanded to speak to my boss. He actually used the words, "I want to speak to the person in charge of Nia Jackson." He was shouting about garnishing my wages. He told the receptionist that I was an ungrateful child who was abandoning her financial obligations, and he wanted the company to redirect my paycheck to his account. The audacity was breathtaking. He really thought the corporate world worked like a scene from a bad sitcom where a father could just demand his daughter's salary. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Sarah, tried to explain that I was not in the employee directory. He accused her of lying. He started making a scene, yelling that I was hiding in the back. That is when the head of security stepped in. Mr. Henderson. A man who stands 6'5" and takes nonsense from absolutely no one. Mr. Henderson knows me very well because my private firm now handles the external audits for Sterling and Finch. Keisha said Mr. Henderson walked up to my father and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you need to lower your voice or I will physically remove you." My father tried to puff out his chest. "Do you know who I am?" he sputtered. "I am her father. I demand to see her supervisor." Mr. Henderson looked him up and down with pure disdain. "Sir, Nia Jackson does not have a supervisor here. She is a managing partner at Obsidian Capital. She is one of our most important VIP vendors. She owns the company we report to." Keisha said the silence in the lobby was deafening. My father's mouth fell open. He stammered, trying to process the information. He went there to get a secretary fired. He found out his daughter was a CEO. Mr. Henderson leaned in close and delivered the final blow. "You are trespassing on private property. And if you ever come back here harassing our business partners, I will have you arrested." My father was escorted out through the revolving doors, looking smaller and grayer than he had ever looked before. I smiled at the phone. He went looking for a victim and found a boss. And the best part was he could not even call me to ask if it was true. He just had to sit in the silence of his dark house and wonder who I really was. I sat in the cool silence of my living room staring at my phone as if it were a bomb that had already detonated. The screen displayed a notification that would have once sent me into a panic attack. 10 new voicemails, all from my mother. I did not call her back. I simply pressed play on the speakerphone, letting her voice fill the empty air. The first message was soft, almost weeping. "Naya, baby, please pick up. The lights are out and the food in the fridge is spoiling. Your father is so worried about you. We know you are just stressed. Call us so we can fix this." I took a sip of wine. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was rewriting reality, making me the confused victim, and them the worried saviors. I skipped to the fourth message. The tone had shifted. The sweetness was curdling into irritation. "Nia, this is not funny. Your brother is stuck at a bar because his card was declined. He has clients with him. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for the family? Fix it now before he does something rash." I skipped again. Message number 7. Now the mask was completely off. The voice was shrill, distorted by rage and static. You ungrateful little brat. After everything we sacrificed for you, we put a roof over your head, we fed you. And this is how you repay us. By leaving us in the dark. You are just like your grandmother, selfish and cold. I let the insults wash over me. They used to sting like acid, but now they just felt like data points confirming my hypothesis. Finally, I played the last message. It was recorded only 10 minutes ago. The rage had settled into a low, venomous hiss. Your father is checking his blood pressure right now, Naya. It is sky high. If he has a stroke tonight, his blood is on your hands. You want to kill him, don't you? You want to see us destroyed. Well, remember this. God does not like ugly. You will reap what you sow, Nia. You will die alone in that fancy apartment, and no one will care. I pressed the delete button. The room returned to silence. Once upon a time, that threat of divine punishment would have sent me running back to them, checkbook in hand. I would have begged for forgiveness for sins I never committed. But tonight I realized something profound. My mother was not praying for my soul. She was praying for my bank account. And God had nothing to do with their greed. I set the phone down. Let them curse me. Let them pray against me. I was not killing my father. I was just finally refusing to be the life support for their ego. I checked the time. It was almost midnight. The emotional assault had failed. Now it was time for the tactical counterattack. I knew my mother better than she knew herself. When guilt failed, she would turn to the only person she thought could bully me into submission. But she did not know that I was already 3 steps ahead of him, too. I sat forward in my Herman Miller chair and cracked my knuckles. The emotional daughter was gone. The forensic accountant was clocking in. I woke up my 3 monitors, and the room was bathed in the cool blue glow of data. To the untrained eye, my screens looked like a wall of boring numbers. To me, they were a crime scene. I navigated to the Secretary of State website and pulled up the filings for Marcus S. Company, MJ Innovations, LLC. He always bragged about his proprietary software, but I had never seen a single line of code. I started digging into the UCC filings, which track liens against business assets. The results populated the screen instantly. It was a sea of red flags. Marcus had taken out 3 high-interest merchant cash advances in the last 6 months. These are the payday loans of the corporate world, desperate measures for dying companies. I cross-referenced his reported revenue with his lifestyle spending. The math was impossible. He was leasing a Range Rover and renting a downtown office space on a reported income of $0. Then I found the smoking gun. I accessed the public ledger of his crowdfunding campaign. He had raised $200,000 from small local investors, mostly people from our church and old high school friends. I traced the pattern of disbursements. Every time a new investor wired money, 50% went to pay off a previous angry investor, and the other 50% went directly to a shell company registered in Tiffany's name. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not just a failing business, this was a classic Ponzi scheme. He was using new money to silence old debts while skimming the top for Gucci bags and steak dinners. He was not just a liar, he was a felon in the making. I looked at the dates. The cycle was speeding up. The payments were getting closer together. The investors were asking for their returns, and the pot was empty. That explained the desperation. That explained the text message demanding $50,000. He did not need a bridge loan to expand. He needed hush money to keep the house of cards from collapsing on top of him. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. My brother was not just broke. He was dangerous. And I was the only one with the flashlight seeing the cliff he was driving toward. My eyes drifted away from the computer screens for a moment, and the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. The house was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and the sound of football on the television. I had arrived early to help my mother cook, because that was what good daughters did. I left my purse in the hallway on the entry table. A mistake. A rookie mistake. Around 4 in the afternoon, Marcus and Tiffany arrived. They made an entrance as usual. Tiffany was wearing a fur coat that was too warm for the Georgia autumn, and on her arm she carried a bright orange box. The sight of that orange box made the room go quiet. Everyone knows what that specific shade of orange means. It means Hermes. It means money. Tiffany placed the box on the dining table like it was the baby Jesus. She opened it with theatrical slowness, revealing a Birkin bag in pristine Togo leather. My mother gasped. My aunts crowded around touching the leather with reverence. Marcus stood back, beaming, his chest puffed out. Business has been good, he lied. I wanted to treat my queen. I felt a buzz in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a fraud alert from American Express. A charge of $12,450 had just been authorized at the Hermes boutique in Buckhead. My stomach dropped. I looked at the timestamp. It was from 2 hours ago. I looked at my purse in the hallway. I walked over and opened it. My wallet was unzipped. My platinum card was missing. The rage was white hot. I turned around, ready to march into that dining room and snatch the bag out of her hands. I was ready to call the police. I was ready to burn the house down. But before I could take a step, a hand clamped down on my arm. It was my father. He dragged me into the kitchen and closed the door. He did not look shocked. He looked annoyed. I know he hissed before I could speak. I saw her take the card. I stared at him, my mouth open. You saw her rob me, and you did nothing. He tightened his grip on my arm. Listen to me, Nia. Marcus needs this. He is trying to close a deal with investors. He needs to look successful. If you go out there and accuse his wife of theft, you humiliate him. You make him look like a man who cannot provide. We do not do that to family. I tried to pull away, but he held fast. You are going to go out there, and you are going to tell everyone that you bought that bag as a gift for your sister-in-law. You are going to say it was a thank you for being such a good wife to your brother. I looked at him, at the man who was supposed to protect me. You want me to pay $12,000 for a lie. He looked me dead in the eye. I want you to pay $12,000 to keep this family together. If you say a word about theft, you are no daughter of mine. I walked back into the dining room. My hands were shaking. I looked at Tiffany, who was preening with the bag. She met my eyes and she smirked. She knew. She knew I wouldn't do anything. I took a deep breath. It is beautiful, Tiffany, I said, my voice dead. I am so glad you like the gift. The room erupted in applause. What a generous sister, everyone said. That was the day the daughter died and the creditor was born. I never forgot that $12,000. And tonight, with interest, I was finally going to collect. I continued to sift through the digital debris of my brother's financial life. It was like excavating a ruin where every layer revealed a new level of incompetence. I had already found the Ponzi scheme and the fake invoices, but I was looking for the trigger. The specific pressure point that had turned him into a desperate animal at the barbecue. I found it in a folder buried deep within a nested directory labeled Miscellaneous. It was a single PDF file with a scanned image that was barely legible. I zoomed in, adjusting the contrast on my monitor until the text became sharp. It was a promissory note, but it was not from a bank. It was not from a credit union. It was from a private lending entity called Apex Capital Partners. In my line of work, I know names like Apex. They are not bankers. They are loan sharks who registered an LLC to give themselves a veneer of legitimacy. I scanned the terms. The interest rate was not annual. It was weekly, 5% interest compounding every 7 days. I did the mental math instantly. This was usury. This was the kind of debt that you do not pay off with money, you pay it off with blood or property. I scrolled down to the signature page. There was Marcus's signature, shaky and desperate. And right next to it was the date. He had signed this 60 days ago. Based on the terms, the balloon payment of $50,000 plus interest was due in exactly 48 hours. I leaned back in my chair, and the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a satisfying snap. This was why he needed the money by tomorrow morning. He was not trying to expand his business. He was trying to keep his legs from getting broken. He was terrified. I looked at the collateral section of the contract. My eyes widened. He had listed the family home, my parents' house, the house I had saved from foreclosure. He had forged my father's signature to pledge the only asset they had left against a loan he could never repay. If he defaulted in 48 hours, Apex Capital would not just sue, they would seize the deed. They would kick my parents out onto the street. A normal sister would panic. A normal sister would call the police or wire the money to save the family home. But I was not a normal sister anymore. I was a strategist watching an enemy make a fatal mistake. A cold smile spread across my face. This was not a disaster. This was leverage. If Apex Capital foreclosed, they would sell the house for pennies on the dollar just to recoup their cash. I could step in. I could buy the debt. I could become the holder of the note. I would not just own the mortgage. I would own them. Marcus had handed me the gun that would end his reign of terror. He thought he was borrowing time, but he had just sold his soul. And I was going to be the one to collect it. I can reconstruct exactly what happened next based on the timeline and the police report filed by the neighbors later that night. The house was pitch black because I had cut the power hours ago. The only light came from the flashlights of the two men standing on the front porch. They did not ring the doorbell. They pounded on the oak wood with a force that shook the frame. Inside the house, the air was stagnant and hot, a physical manifestation of the trap they were in. Marcus would have been the one to open the door. He had no choice. The men from Apex Capital do not leave just because you pretend not to be home. I imagine he stood there sweating through his shirt, blinded by the beams of their flashlights. He tried to stammer out an excuse. He tried to tell them that the wire transfer was coming, that his sister was sending the money in the morning. But loan sharks do not care about sisters, and they do not care about promises. One of the men pushed past him, stepping into the foyer with muddy boots. He told Marcus that time was up. He told him that interest was accruing by the minute, and they were done waiting. This is where the family dynamic truly unraveled. Tiffany came running down the stairs, holding her phone up as a flashlight. She saw the men. She saw her husband cowering against the wall. A normal wife might have been terrified. Tiffany was just practical in the most ruthless way possible. She turned her flashlight on my father Desmond, who was standing at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, confused and frightened. She did not ask the men to leave. She did not call the police. She looked at my father and screamed the solution that had been in her head all along. "Give them the house," she yelled. Her voice echoed in the dark, cavernous entry hall. "Dad, you have equity. Just sign the house over to them as collateral. We can get a loan later to pay them back. Just give them the deed." My father stood there frozen. This was his castle, the symbol of his manhood. And his daughter-in-law was telling him to hand it over to thugs to save her husband from his own mistakes. Marcus looked at Tiffany with wide, terrified eyes. He could not tell her that he had already forged the signature. He could not tell her that Apex Capital already held the note. He just stood there shaking while his wife auctioned off his parents' shelter to save his skin. "Do it, Desmond!" Tiffany shrieked, her face twisted in the harsh light of the LED beam. "Do you want them to hurt Marcus? It is just a house. You can live in an apartment. Save your son." The men from Apex watched this domestic tragedy with bored expressions. They knew they were going to get paid one way or another. They looked at Marcus, then at the house, then at my father. The taller one stepped forward and grinned, showing teeth that looked too white in the darkness. "The lady has a good idea," he said. "We take the house, we take the keys, and we call it even." The morning sun did not bring relief to the Jackson family. It only illuminated the disaster of their own making. I tracked their movements through the GPS on the family car, which I technically still owned. At 9 o'clock sharp, the sedan pulled into the parking lot of First National Bank. They marched inside looking like a ragged army. My father, Desmond, was wearing a wrinkled suit because he could not iron it without electricity. Tiffany was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide the bags under her eyes. And Marcus looked like a man walking to the gallows. They were there to execute the desperate plan Tiffany had screamed about the night before. They were going to take out an emergency home equity line of credit against the house. The plan was to get the cash pay off the loan sharks at Apex Capital and then worry about the bank loan later. It was a stupid plan, born of panic, but it was the only card they had left to play. They sat across from a loan officer, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who likely smelled the desperation on them before they even opened their mouths. I can imagine Marcus doing all the talking. He probably used his best charming voice, the one he uses on investors before he steals their money. He told her they needed to access the equity immediately for a family emergency. He told her his father was the sole owner and was ready to sign. Mrs. Higgins would have nodded politely. She would have typed my father's name into the system. She would have pulled up the property deed and the title history. And that is when the trap I laid 5 years ago finally snapped shut. Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses and frowned at the screen. "I am sorry, Mr. Jackson," she would have said, her voice professional and confused. "We cannot proceed with this application." Marcus likely leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Why not? My father is right here. He is ready to sign." Mrs. Higgins would have turned the monitor so they could see it. "The deed to the house is not in Desmond Jackson's name alone. It is held in a joint tenancy with right of survivorship. There is a co-owner listed on the title." Marcus froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he must have felt dizzy. "Who?" he whispered, even though he already knew the answer. Mrs. Higgins read the name out loud. "Nia Jackson. You need her signature and her physical presence to authorize any lien against this property. Without Ms. Jackson's approval, this asset is frozen." The silence in that office must have been absolute. They had forgotten. In their arrogance, they had forgotten that when I paid off the arrears to save the house from foreclosure 5 years ago, I did not just write a check. I had my lawyers restructure the deed. I added my name to the title specifically to prevent Marcus from doing exactly what he was trying to do right now. I made myself the gatekeeper of their shelter. Marcus looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at Desmond. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They had blocked my number. They had insulted me on the internet. They had told me to rot. And now I was the only person in the world who could save them. The loan officer looked at them, expecting them to call me, expecting them to bring in the loving daughter to help. But she saw the look of horror on their faces, and she knew. She closed the folder. "Unless Ms. Jackson comes in today, I cannot help you. Have a nice day." They walked out of the bank and into the blinding sun. They had no money, they had no power, and they had 40 hours left before the sharks came back to collect. The desperation in the Jackson household had mutated into something far more criminal than simple panic. They retreated to the sweltering kitchen of my parents' house, where the air was thick with humidity and the smell of spoiling food from the refrigerator. The power was still out, so they were working by the light of a battery-operated camping lantern. It cast long, distorted shadows against the walls, turning my family into caricatures of themselves. Tiffany sat at the granite island. She was not crying anymore. She had moved past tears into the cold calculation of a cornered animal. Spread out before her were dozens of scraps of paper and a few old birthday cards I had sent over the years. She was holding a fine-point black pen, gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white. She was practicing my signature. Over and over again she traced the loops of the N and the sharp angle of the J, trying to capture the muscle memory of my hand. Marcus paced the floor behind her, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag. He was terrified. He knew that what they were doing was a felony punishable by years in prison. But Tiffany was the siren singing him onto the rocks. She looked up from her work, her eyes bright with a manic energy. "Stop pacing, Marcus," she snapped. "You are making me nervous. This has to be perfect." Marcus stopped and looked at her, his voice trembling. "Tiff, this is fraud. If she finds out, she will send us to jail. You saw what she did to the power. You saw what she is capable of." Tiffany laughed, a harsh sound that had no humor in it. She went back to scribbling. "She is not going to find out. Not until it is too late. Look at her Instagram, Marcus. Look at the comments. She is getting destroyed. She is frantic right now trying to save her reputation. She is not checking property records. She is not looking at the county clerk database. She is distracted. By the time she notices anything, we will have the money, we will pay off Apex, and we will pay the bank back. It is just a temporary fix. Marcus hesitated. The lie was seductive. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that this was just a borrowing of authority, not a theft of identity. Tiffany sensed his weakness and pressed harder. Do you want those men to come back tonight? Do you want them to break your legs? Do you want them to hurt Trey? We are doing this for the family. We are doing this to survive. She held up a piece of paper. On it was a perfect replica of my signature. It was indistinguishable from the real thing. See, she said, smiling. It is easy, she is just a sister Marcus. She owes us this. She has millions and she leaves us here to rot. We are just taking what should have been offered. She slid the loan documents across the counter toward him. We go to a notary I know in the next town over. He owes me a favor. He won't ask for her ID if I slip him $500. We sign the papers, we get the check, we save the house. Simple. Marcus looked at the paper. He looked at the signature that belonged to the sister who had carried him for his entire life. He looked at his wife who was offering him a way out that was actually a trap door to hell. He took a deep breath. Okay, he whispered. Let us do it. The blue light of my monitors was the only illumination in the room, casting long shadows against the walls of my office. It was 2 in the morning, but I was wide awake. My body was running on adrenaline and caffeine, but my mind was operating with the cold precision of a machine. I had set up a custom algorithm years ago, linked directly to the major credit bureaus. It was designed to detect any unauthorized activity on my accounts, or any assets linked to my social security number. I built it to catch identity thieves from Russia or China. I never thought I would use it to catch my own brother. A shrill alarm pierced the silence. It was not the soft ping of an email. It was the red alert siren indicating a critical security breach. A new window popped up on my center screen, pulsing with urgency. New inquiry detected. Secured loan application. Collateral verified. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. I clicked the notification. The file downloaded instantly. It was a PDF of a loan application submitted to a predatory lender in Alabama, one that specialized in high-risk borrowers. I scrolled past the borrower information where Marcus had listed himself as the primary applicant. I scrolled past the inflated income statements and the lies about his business revenue. I went straight to the last page, the signature page, and there it was. My name, Nia Jackson, signed in black ink right next to the date. I stared at it for a long time. It was a good forgery. I had to give Tiffany credit. She had captured the sharp angle of my J and the loop of my N almost perfectly. To a tired loan officer or a corrupt notary, it would look legitimate. But I am not a loan officer. I am a forensic accountant. I zoomed in until the ink pixels filled the screen. I could see the hesitation marks. I could see the microscopic tremors where the hand paused because it was drawing a picture, not writing a name. It was the signature of a fraud. A wave of cold fury washed over me. This was no longer a family dispute. This was no longer about a barbecue or a skipped bill. This was a felony. They had crossed the line from toxic into criminal. They had stolen my identity. They had forged my consent to encumber an asset worth $500,000. I looked at the timestamp on the digital file. They had submitted this 40 minutes ago. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought I was asleep or crying or distracted by the internet hate mob. They had no idea that I was watching them in real time. I moved my mouse and clicked the save button. I backed the file up to 3 different secure servers. I printed a hard copy. This piece of paper was their death warrant. It was the evidence that would strip them of everything. The house, their freedom, their custody of Trey. I picked up the phone. I did not call my parents. I did not call Marcus. I dialed the number for the fraud division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where my old college roommate was now a senior agent. It was time to bring the hammer down. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Harrison. He is not just a lawyer, he is a shark in a three-piece suit who charges $1,000 an hour to destroy people legally. It was 3 in the morning, but he answered on the second ring because he knows that when I call, it is either an emergency or an opportunity. I sent him the PDF with the forged signature and the loan application. I heard him intake a sharp breath on the other end of the line. "This is sloppy, Nia," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep, but sharp with intellect. "The forgery is decent, but the submission IP address traces back to a residential router registered to your father. They did not even use a VPN. I can have this flagged for fraud in 5 minutes. We can block the transfer before it clears the ACH network. I can draft a cease and desist letter that will make their heads spin." He was ready to protect me. He was ready to shield his client from theft. But he was missing the bigger picture. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights that were indifferent to my family drama. "No, Harrison," I said, my voice calm and cold. "Do not block it." There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence where I could practically hear his brain recalibrating. "Excuse me?" he asked. "If we block it now," I explained, "it is just attempted fraud. It is a messy family dispute. They will cry to a judge that it was a misunderstanding or that I verbally authorized it. It becomes a he said, she said situation. I do not want an argument, Harrison. I want a conviction." I took a sip of water, letting the coolness soothe my dry throat. I need the money to land. I need the wire transfer to complete. I need the funds to move from the lender into Marcus' personal account. Once that digital handshake happens, it stops being a mistake and starts being federal wire fraud. It becomes bank fraud. It becomes identity theft involving a sum over $10,000. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Harrison let out a low whistle. "You want them to hang themselves," he said. "I do not want them to hang," I corrected. "I want them to be buried so deep under the weight of the law that they can never climb out to hurt me again. Let the loan go through. Approve the transaction if the bank calls for verification. Let them think they won. Let them see the zeros in their account. Let them spend $1 of it, because the moment they do, the trap snaps shut." Harrison chuckled, a dry, dark sound. "Remind me never to cross you, Nia. Consider it done. I will monitor the wire. As soon as it hits, I will prepare the package for the district attorney." I hung up the phone. I looked at the forged signature one last time. They wanted my money so badly. I was going to give it to them. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, and it was going to cost them their lives. The bait was set. Now I just had to wait for the bite. The notification on my phone was not a text message, but a secure link from Vance, my private investigator. I hired Vance because he is expensive and because he lacks a moral compass. He does not judge, he just documents. I clicked the link, and a gallery of high-resolution images populated my screen. I expected to see photos of Marcus meeting with the loan sharks to pay off the debt. I expected to see them rushing to the bank to save the house. I gave them too much credit. I assumed their survival instinct was stronger than their vanity. I was wrong. The first photo was taken outside Phipps Plaza, the most expensive shopping center in Atlanta. Marcus and Tiffany were walking out of the Gucci store. They were not hiding. They were not looking over their shoulders. They were beaming. Tiffany was holding 3 large shopping bags. Marcus was wearing a new pair of sunglasses that I recognized as Tom Ford retail price $500. They had just committed a federal felony to secure a loan to save their home, and the first thing they did was go shopping. I scrolled to the next image. It was a receipt Vance had managed to photograph, likely by bribing a waiter or a valet. It was for the presidential suite at the St. Regis Hotel for tonight. The deposit alone was $5,000. The memo line read, "Launch Party, MJ Innovations." I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the level of delusion required to live this way. They were drowning in debt. They had just stolen money using my name. And instead of buying life jackets, they were buying champagne. They were throwing a party to impress investors who did not exist using money that was evidence of a crime. It was pathological. It was an addiction to status so severe that it overrode the basic human need for safety. They were going to stand in that ballroom tonight, wearing stolen clothes, drinking stolen wine, and lying to everyone, including themselves. Vance included a note at the bottom of the file. Subject appears to be organizing a gala event for tonight at 8 p.m. Guest list includes local influencers and potential angel investors. Catering order for lobster and Wagyu beef confirmed. I leaned back in my chair. A gala. They were gathering an audience for their own execution. They wanted the spotlight. They wanted to be the center of attention. Fine. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would make sure this party was unforgettable. I picked up my phone and called Harrison. Get the paperwork ready, I said. And call the FBI. Tell them to meet me at the St. Regis. We are going to a party. I sat in the dark of my office, illuminated only by the harsh light of my smartphone screen. I was watching a tragedy unfold in real time, but to the rest of the world it looked like a triumph. I refreshed Tiffany's profile and a new story popped up. The ring around her profile picture pulsed with the pink and orange gradient of Instagram, inviting me to witness her delusion. I tapped the screen. The video played with a blast of upbeat hip-hop music. The camera panned shakily across a glistening white Range Rover parked in the circular driveway of the St. Regis Hotel. It was brand new, the dealer tag still hanging from the rearview mirror. The camera then flipped to show Tiffany's face. She had used a heavy filter that smoothed her skin to porcelain and enlarged her eyes, but it could not hide the manic glitter of adrenaline in her pupils. She shrieked into the microphone. "Look what Daddy brought home!" she yelled, panning the camera to Marcus, who was leaning against the hood of the car, looking like he owned the world. He held a bottle of champagne in one hand and the keys in the other. He flashed a peace sign, not realizing that he was posing with the evidence of his own crime. The caption across the bottom of the screen was written in a bold cursive font. "Success is the best revenge. Thank you, hubby, for the upgrade." We move in silence, but the results speak loud. I almost laughed out loud. They moved in silence. There was nothing silent about this. They were screaming their guilt from the digital rooftops. They had taken the wire transfer that Harrison allowed to go through, and instead of paying off the loan sharks or saving the house, they had gone straight to a luxury dealership and leased a car. They could not afford to impress people they did not know. I looked at the comments rolling in on the side of the screen. Her followers were eating it up. Boss babe energy. Goals. Secure the bag, sis. They had no idea that the bag was secured with a forged signature and a stolen identity. They had no idea that the car was technically leased with money that belonged to the woman Tiffany had spent all week dragging through the mud. I watched the video loop a second time. I analyzed the background. I could see the valet staring at them with a look of mild annoyance. I could see the reflection of the hotel security guard in the car window. Every detail was preserved. I took a screenshot. Then I did something petty, something small. I switched to my burner account. It was a faceless profile I used for investigations with 0 followers and 0 posts. I navigated back to her story. I waited for the video to loop again, and then I double-tapped. A small white heart appeared on the screen. I liked the photo. It was a digital kiss of death. I wanted her to see the notification. I wanted her to see that anonymous account and wonder who was watching. I wanted her to feel that tiny prick of paranoia in the back of her mind. "Enjoy the car, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room. "Drive it fast, because where you are going you will not need a driver license. You will only need a lawyer." I saved the screenshot to the evidence folder labeled United States versus Marcus Jackson. The file was getting thick, and the party had not even started yet. The afternoon sun filtered through the polarized glass of my corner office at Obsidian Capital, casting long, sharp shadows across my mahogany desk. The silence here was different from the silence in my car or my apartment. It was the silence of power. It was the quiet hum of servers processing millions of dollars in transactions, and the soft scratching of expensive pens on legal documents. I was reviewing the final dossier for the FBI, checking the timestamps on the wire transfers one last time, when a soft knock broke my concentration. It was Sarah, my executive assistant. She stood in the doorway holding a large square envelope with two hands as if she were carrying a bomb. She looked confused. "Ms. Jackson, a courier just dropped this off for you." He said it was urgent and required a personal handover. She walked over and placed the object on my desk. It was ridiculous. That was the only word for it. The envelope was made of thick cream-colored cardstock, the kind that costs $5 a sheet. It was sealed with actual wax, a glob of red, stamped with a crest that I did not recognize. It looked like a prop from a period drama about French royalty not mail for a modern financial firm. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it. It was heavy. Obscenely heavy. I turned it over. My name was written on the front in elaborate gold calligraphy. Nia Jackson. The loops of the letters were so wide they practically screamed for attention. I knew immediately who sent it. This had Tiffany's fingerprints all over it. It was her idea of class, which was just money shouting at volume 10. I slid my letter opener under the flap and broke the wax seal. Inside was an invitation layered with vellum and embossed with gold foil. It read, "The Jackson family cordially invites you to an evening of excellence, a gala celebration, honoring the launch of MJ Innovations and the future of our legacy. The date was tonight. The time was 8 o'clock. The location was the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel." I stared at the card, my thumb tracing the raised lettering. An evening of excellence. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Less than 24 hours ago, they were sitting in the dark, eating spoiling food. Less than 12 hours ago, they were committing federal wire fraud to avoid having their kneecaps broken by loan sharks. And now they were hosting a black tie gala. I flipped the card over. On the back, there was a handwritten note in blue ink. Marcus's handwriting, spiky and aggressive. "Nia, we want you there. No hard feelings. Come see what real success looks like. We did it without you. Love, Marcus and Tiffany." I laughed. A low, dry sound that startled Sarah, who was still standing by the door. That was the hook. That was the reason for this entire charade. They did not invite me because they wanted to reconcile. They did not invite me because they missed me. They invited me because a victory is not a victory unless your enemies are there to watch you win. They wanted to parade me in front of their new friends. They wanted to point at me and whisper to their investors that I was the bitter sister who tried to hold them back. They wanted to see the look on my face when they pulled up in that white Range Rover. They wanted to prove that they were the main characters, and I was just a supporting villain who had been defeated. It was a power play, a public execution of my ego. They thought I would be humiliated. They thought I would be seething with jealousy seeing them spend the money they stole. They had no idea that the money was not a prize. It was a tracking device. They had no idea that every bottle of champagne they popped tonight was just another line item on their indictment. I looked at the invitation again. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was the most incriminating piece of paper I had ever held. They were literally inviting the prosecution to the crime scene. Sarah cleared her throat, shifting her weight nervously. "Should I send a decline, Ms. Jackson? I can tell them you are booked." I looked up at her and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey step directly into the trap. "No, Sarah. Send a reply immediately. Tell them I will be there. Tell them I wouldn't miss it for the world. And Sarah, yes, ma'am. Call my stylist. Tell him I need the red dress, the one that looks like blood. I want to make sure I am dressed for the occasion." Sarah nodded and hurried out of the room, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I placed the invitation on top of the FBI file. It was the final piece of the puzzle. They wanted an audience. They wanted a spectacle. Tonight, I was going to give them one they would never forget. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving my apartment in a wash of twilight blues and grays. The red dress my war paint hung on the back of the bedroom door, a silent sentinel waiting for the violence of the evening to begin. But I was not ready to put it on yet. I needed a moment of weakness before I armored myself for the kill. I walked to the wet bar and poured a glass of whiskey. No ice. I needed the burn. I carried the glass to the bottom drawer of my desk, the one place in this sterile million-dollar fortress that held the messy artifacts of the past. I pushed aside old passports and backup hard drives until my fingers brushed against the worn edges of a leather photo album. It was the only thing I had taken from my childhood bedroom when I moved out. I opened it to a marked page. The photo was a faded Polaroid from 1998 taken at Disney World. I stared at the glossy square image until the lines blurred. It was a picture of a happy family. Or at least that is what a stranger would see. My father was wearing a goofy tourist hat, lifting Marcus up on his shoulders. Marcus was 6 years old, holding a giant, melting ice cream cone, grinning with the entitlement of a prince who knows the world was built for him. My mother was leaning into my father, laughing, her hand resting possessively on his arm. And there I was, 10 years old, standing slightly off to the side. I was not holding an ice cream cone. I was holding the backpack. I was holding the water bottles. I was holding the park map. I was looking at the camera with a smile so eager, so desperate to please, that it broke my heart to look at it now. Even then, I was the mule. Even then, I was the one carrying the baggage while they enjoyed the ride. I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek, followed by another. I did not wipe them away. I let them fall, landing on the glass of the photo frame. I was not crying for the man who was currently popping champagne in a stolen hotel suite. I was not crying for the woman who had left me those venomous voicemails. I was crying for that little girl in the picture. I was crying for 10-year-old Nia, who actually believed that if she just carried the backpack without complaining, if she just got straight, as if she just became successful enough, they would finally put Marcus down and pick her up. She spent her entire life running a race where the finish line was always moving. She starved herself of affection, thinking she could buy it later with achievements. She did not know that love is not a transaction. She did not know that some people are black holes capable of consuming all the light you give them without ever reflecting a single ray back. I took a long sip of the whiskey, letting the alcohol numb the ache in my chest. I mourned her. I mourned the years I wasted trying to be good enough for people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I mourned the money I spent, not because I missed the cash, but because every dollar was a desperate plea for validation that never came. I looked at my mother's face in the photo. She looked so young, so capable of love. How did that woman turn into a monster who would curse her own child for a utility bill? Maybe she was always that way, and I was just too close to see it. Or maybe enabling Marcus had rotted her soul from the inside out. It did not matter anymore. The why did not matter, only the how I was going to end it. I set the glass down with a heavy thud. The tears stopped as quickly as they had started. That was it. That was the funeral. I had grieved for the little girl. Now the woman had work to do. I looked at the photo one last time, and then I did something I had never done before. I took the photo out of the album and tore it in half. I ripped right down the middle, separating the girl with the backpack from the family that used her. I crumpled the side with my parents and Marcus into a ball and tossed it into the wastebasket. I kept the side with the little girl. I smoothed out the crease. "I am doing this for you," I whispered to the 10-year-old face. "I am setting you free." I finished the whiskey in one swallow. The burn felt like fuel. I stood up and walked toward the bedroom where the red dress was waiting. The time for tears was over. The time for justice had arrived. The red dress remained on the hanger. It was too passionate, too emotional. Tonight was not about anger. It was about sterilization. I reached past the silk and pulled out the suit I had commissioned from Savile Row. It was stark, blinding white, the color of ice, the color of a funeral shroud in the east. I stepped into the high-waisted trousers and the fabric fell in a perfect razor-sharp line to the floor. I slipped on the blazer. It was structured and severe with padded shoulders that gave me the silhouette of a warrior. I fastened the single button. It cinched my waist tight. I looked in the mirror. In a room full of people wearing black tie, I would be the only thing they saw. I would be the ghost they could not ignore. I walked to the wall safe and spun the dial. The heavy steel door swung open. I bypassed the velvet jewelry boxes. Diamonds were useless tonight. I reached for the items that held real power. First, the USB drive. It was a small silver rectangle, cold to the touch. Inside that drive was the entire digital autopsy of my brother's business. The fake invoices, the shell companies, the metadata from the forged signature. It was a digital bomb waiting for a detonator. I dropped it into my structured clutch where it clicked against the leather. Next, I reached for the file. It was a thick manila folder heavy with the weight of consequences. The red stamp on the front was vibrant and terrifying. United States Department of Justice. Evidence. I ran my thumb over the seal. This was not just paper. It was the end of Marcus's life as he knew it. It was the foreclosure of his freedom. I folded it carefully and slid it into the bag, ensuring the red stamp would be visible the moment I opened it. Finally, I turned to the vanity. I applied my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. Foundation to mask the humanity, eyeliner to sharpen the gaze, and then the lipstick. I picked up the gold tube. The shade was called Matador. I applied it slowly, watching my lips turn the color of fresh blood. It was the only spot of color on my entire body. A warning. I blotted my lips and dropped the tube into the bag alongside the evidence. USB, file, lipstick, the trinity of their destruction. I snapped the clutch shut. The sound was loud and final, like a pistol cocking. I took one last look at my reflection. The crying girl from the photo was gone. The victim was dead. Standing in her place was the executioner in white. I turned off the lights, leaving the apartment in darkness. It was time to crash the party. The air in the grand ballroom smelled of expensive lilies and cheap ambition. The crystal chandeliers cast a golden haze over the room, illuminating a crowd of perhaps 50 people. I recognized most of them. They were the B-list of Atlanta social scene people who went to parties not because they were invited, but because they hoped to be photographed. I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors. The sound of clinking glasses and polite chatter died instantly. It was not a gradual silence, it was a sudden vacuum, as if I had sucked the oxygen out of the room. My white suit caught the light, glowing with a spectral intensity against the sea of black tuxedos and dark evening gowns. I did not walk, I glided. My heels clicked a steady, ominous rhythm on the marble floor. Heads turned. Whispers started like the hissing of snakes. That is the sister. The one who hates them. Look at her face. At her. I kept my chin high, my eyes locked on the stage at the far end of the room. There they were, the king and queen of the House of Cards. Marcus was holding a glass of champagne, his other arm wrapped possessively around Tiffany's waist. Tiffany was wearing a gold sequined dress that was too tight and too bright, looking like a disco ball that had fallen from the ceiling. When she saw me, her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, fear perhaps or surprise, before the mask of arrogance slammed back into place. She tapped the microphone, the feedback screeching through the speakers, causing guests to wince. "Well, well, well!" Her voice boomed, amplified and distorted. "Look who finally decided to show up!" She gestured toward me with a manic sweeping motion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my sister-in-law, Nia." The crowd parted, creating a corridor between us. I could feel their judgment heavy and sticky on my skin. Tiffany stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her confidence bolstered by the alcohol and the lie she was living. "I thought you were too good for us, Nia," she sneered into the mic, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "What is the matter? Did your power get cut off at that little apartment of yours? Did you come here to grab a plate of free food?" A few sycophants in the front row chuckled. Tiffany fed off the energy. Or maybe she lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper. Maybe you came to beg your big brother for a loan now that he has finally made it. Is that it, Nia? Do you need a handout? Marcus laughed nervously beside her, avoiding my gaze. I stood in the center of the room, perfectly still. A younger Nia would have flushed red. A younger Nia would have stammered a defense. But I just stood there, my face a mask of porcelain calm. I adjusted my clutch, feeling the hard edge of the USB drive against my palm. She thought she was roasting me. She did not realize she was reading her own last rites. I looked her dead in the eye and offered a small, cold smile. She expected a victim. She got a glacier. The silence that followed Tiffany's introduction was not empty. It was heavy with the collective judgment of a room full of strangers who had been fed a diet of lies about my character. But the final blow did not come from my sister-in-law. It came from the man who raised me. My father Desmond stepped forward from the shadows of the stage. He was wearing a tuxedo that strained at the buttons, a rental that he likely paid for with the very credit card I had paid off for him last year. His face was flushed not just with alcohol, but with the intoxicating rush of vindication. He looked at me standing alone in my white suit, and he did not see his daughter. He saw a defect. He saw the one person who refused to applaud his delusions. He grabbed the microphone from Tiffany, his hand shaking with adrenaline. "Do you see this, Nia?" His voice boomed across the ballroom, echoing off the marble walls. "Do you see what happens when you have faith?" He swept his arm across the room, gesturing to the rented crystal, the rented waiters, and the leased life his son had built on a foundation of fraud. "You spent your whole life looking down on your brother. You thought you were better than him because you had your little job and your little degree. But look at him now. He is a CEO. He is a visionary." My father looked at the crowd, seeking their approval, like a comedian waiting for a laugh. "My daughter here, she never believed in family. She hoarded her money. She watched us struggle. She wanted us to fail, just so she could feel superior." He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing with genuine disdain. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Nia. You come walking in here with your nose in the air trying to ruin his big night. But you cannot touch him. He is a genius, and you are just a jealous, bitter little girl who ended up with nothing." My mother stood beside him, nodding vigorously. Her face was a mask of smug satisfaction. She finally had the narrative she wanted. The successful son, the villainous daughter. The world made sense to her again. She raised her glass in my direction, a silent gesture of dismissal. Marcus soaked it all in. He stood between them, expanding like a pufferfish. The fear I had seen in his eyes the night before was gone, replaced by a terrifying arrogance. He believed it. In that moment, he actually believed he was a genius. He believed the money was his. He believed the car was his. He had completely dissociated from the reality that he was 48 hours away from prison. He took the microphone from our father. His movements were loose and sloppy, the champagne doing the work of a personality. "Now, Dad, let us not be too hard on her," Marcus said, his voice slick with mock magnanimity. "Not everyone has the vision. Not everyone is built for the big leagues." He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at me. "It is okay, Nia. We forgive you. We know it must be hard to see your little brother surpass you. But hey, grab a plate, have a drink. It is on me." He laughed, and the crowd laughed with him. A ripple of sycophantic chuckles moved through the room. Marcus raised his glass high, the bubbles catching the light. "To MJ Innovations," he shouted. "To family. And to those who doubted us, may they watch us rise from the sidelines. Cheers!" The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. People cheered. My parents hugged him, tears of pride streaming down their faces. It was a perfect tableau of family success, a masterpiece of deception. I stood there motionless, watching them celebrate their own funeral. They were so happy, they were so proud, and they had absolutely no idea that the woman in the white suit was not there to eat their food. She was there to serve the warrant. I reached into my clutch, and my fingers closed around the cold metal of the USB drive. The toast was over. It was time for the rebuttal. I did not scream. I did not throw a glass of wine. I did not do any of the things they expected from an emotional, jealous woman. I simply walked. The crowd parted automatically, sensing a shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythmic military precision, counting down the final seconds of their freedom. I ascended the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit my white suit, making me glow with a blinding spectral intensity that contrasted sharply with the cheap glittering sequins Tiffany was wearing. Marcus watched me approach, his smile faltering. He tried to hide the microphone behind his back, a clumsy, childish instinct, but he was slow and drunk, and I was sober and lethal. I reached out. I did not snatch it. I simply took it from his hand with the ease of someone taking a toy from a toddler. He let go, paralyzed by the sheer force of my presence. The feedback whine of the microphone cut through the room, silencing the last of the whispers. I looked down at the sea of faces, the strangers who had been laughing at me moments ago. Then I turned to my family. My father's mouth was hanging open. My mother was frowning in confusion. Tiffany crossed her arms, trying to look defiant, but I saw the tremor in her hands. I smiled, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Thank you for the warm introduction, Tiffany," I said, my voice crisp, amplified, and devoid of any tremor. "And congratulations, Marcus. This party is truly impressive. The lobster, the champagne, the new Range Rover out front. It certainly looks like success." I paused, letting the compliment hang in the air, letting them relax for a fraction of a second. Then I detonated the bomb. "But as a forensic accountant, I feel a professional obligation to correct a small error in your financial statement. You seem to be confusing revenue with liability." The crowd began to murmur. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushing, but I held up a hand, and the security team I had hired, off-duty police officers, stepped out from the shadows of the wings, crossing their arms. Marcus froze. I continued, my voice sharpening into a scalpel. "The money you are spending tonight, the capital for this launch, it did not come from investors. It did not come from software sales. It came from a high-risk predatory mortgage loan approved at 2 o'clock this morning." I heard a gasp from my mother. "And the interesting thing about that loan, Marcus, is the collateral. You didn't pledge your business assets. You pledged Mom and Dad's house." My father's face turned from a flush of pride to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at Marcus, betrayal dawning in his eyes. "But that isn't even the best part," I said, turning to look Tiffany dead in the eye. "To secure a loan against a jointly owned property, you need the signature of the co-owner. You need my signature, and since I was asleep in my apartment when that application was submitted, we are left with only one conclusion." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the thick file with the red FBI stamp. I held it up high, letting the light catch the official seal. "Forgery." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "You and your wife forged my signature on federal loan documents. You committed wire fraud. You committed bank fraud. And you committed aggravated identity theft to fund a party where you could brag about being rich." I opened the folder, pulling out the blown-up scan of the forged document. "I have the IP address. I have the metadata. I have the bank transfer records. To the distinguished guests in the audience, I apologize for ruining your evening. My brother is not a CEO. He is a felon who is currently serving you stolen champagne." Marcus stumbled back, bumping into the table behind him. A tower of glasses crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces, the sound of his life breaking apart. "This isn't a launch party," I said, dropping the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. "It's a crime scene." The microphone lay on the floor like a dropped weapon, but I did not need it anymore. The silence in the room was so absolute that my normal speaking voice would have carried to the back rows. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. It was a signal to the audiovisual technician in the booth at the back of the room. I had tipped him $500 before the event started to override the system on my command. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the spinning logo of MJ Innovations, flickered and went black. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the screen roared back to life with a new image. It was not a corporate graphic. It was a grainy, high-definition video recorded in night vision. Vance had truly outdone himself. He had filmed through the uncurtained kitchen window of my parents' house the night before, using a long-range lens. The image was undeniable. There was Tiffany sitting at the kitchen island surrounded by scraps of paper. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 1:15 a.m. On the giant screen, every detail was magnified 10 feet tall. The audience watched in horrified fascination as Tiffany held a pen, gripping it tightly, practicing the loops of a signature over and over again. She held up a piece of paper, comparing it to a birthday card I had sent years ago. She smirked. It was the smirk that nailed her coffin. It was a visual confession of intent played on a loop for 50 witnesses. Tiffany screamed. It was a feral animal sound. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, lunging toward the screen as if she could physically block the projection with her body. But the video cut away, replaced by a slideshow of documents. These were the bank statements from the last 12 hours. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, pointing at the data. "Let us look at the business plan," I said, my voice cutting through Tiffany's hysterics. "Here is the deposit from the lender. $50,000. And here is the investment strategy." The screen cycled through the transactions. 10,000 a.m. Gucci store Buckhead, $2,000. 11:30 a.m. Tom Ford Atlanta, $500. 12:45 p.m. Range Rover lease, down payment, $5,000. 2:00 p.m. St. Regis event deposit, $10,000. The list went on. Not a single cent had gone to software development. Not a penny had gone to paying off the loan sharks. Every dollar was spent on vanity. Every dollar was spent on the costume they were wearing right now. I turned to the investors in the front row. "Gentlemen," I asked, my voice dripping with ice, "does this look like a tech startup to you? Or does it look like a shopping spree funded by fraud?" The investors were already standing up, buttoning their jackets, looking at Marcus with disgusted expressions. They had seen enough. The illusion was not just broken, it was pulverized. Marcus stood there, his face pale and sweating, staring at the receipts that proved he was nothing more than a thief in a rented tuxedo. He looked at me, his eyes begging for mercy, but he found none. I was not his sister tonight. I was the audit, and the balance was due. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open, they were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. The sound was like a thunderclap that broke the trance of the room. Heads snapped around. It was not a late arrival. It was not a waiter with more wine. Entering the room was the phalanx of men and women in dark windbreakers emblazoned with bold yellow letters that spelled out the end of the Jackson family fantasy: FBI. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of a wolf pack, sweeping through the confused guests who scrambled out of the way, knocking over chairs in their haste to distance themselves from the stage. Leading the charge was Special Agent Miller, a man I had known since college, who walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of someone who had done his homework. He did not look at the stunned investors. He did not look at the trembling parents. His eyes were locked on the two figures freezing on the stage. Marcus looked for an exit, his eyes darting to the service door on the left, but two uniformed officers were already standing there, arms crossed, blocking the path. He was trapped in the spotlight he had so desperately wanted. Agent Miller stopped at the base of the stairs. He did not need a microphone. His voice was practiced, authoritative, and filled the silent room. "Marcus Jackson, Tiffany Jackson, I am placing you under arrest." Tiffany let out a strangled gasp, clutching her sequined dress as if it could protect her. "On what grounds?" she screeched, her voice cracking. "You cannot do this. We are hosting a private event. Do you know who we are?" Agent Miller climbed the stairs, his handcuffs glinting under the stage lights. "We know exactly who you are," he said, calm and cold. "You are being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering." He reached Marcus first. My brother did not fight. He did not argue. He simply collapsed inward, his posture disintegrating as the reality of his life caught up to him. He offered his wrists almost meekly. The metal cuffs ratcheted shut with a sharp mechanical click. It was a sound that seemed to echo off the vaulted ceiling louder than any applause he had ever received. Tiffany was not as compliant. But when an agent reached for her, she recoiled, knocking over the podium. "No!" she screamed, thrashing as they grabbed her arms. "This is a mistake. She did it." She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Nia set us up. She told us to do it. It is her fault." Agent Miller did not even blink. He spun her around, pressing her against the wall of the stage. "You have the right to remain silent, ma'am, and I suggest you use it." He snapped the cuffs onto her wrists, silencing her protests with the weight of federal authority. I watched from the side of the stage, my face impassive. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the inevitable conclusion of their choices. They were being dragged away not as martyrs, but as common criminals. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were visible through the ballroom windows, painting the walls in chaotic strobes of blue and red. The party was over. The guests were already fleeing, pulling out their phones to tweet about the disaster. The event of the year had turned into the scandal of the decade, and as they hauled Marcus past me, he looked up. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in his life, he saw me not as a sister, not as a bank, but as the one thing he should have feared most: the truth. My father lunged forward, pushing past a startled security guard with the desperate strength of a man watching his legacy crumble. He threw himself between Agent Miller and Marcus, holding up his hands as if he could physically stop the gears of the federal justice system. "Stop!" he bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You cannot take him. This is a misunderstanding. I am the owner of the house on Oak Street. I am the father. I gave them permission to use the deed. If the owner consents, there is no fraud." He looked around the room, seeking validation from the shocked guests. "Tell them, Nia. Tell them I said it was okay." He looked at me pleadingly, expecting the dutiful daughter to lie to the FBI to save the family name. I walked toward him slowly. I did not look angry. I looked tired. I reached into my clutch one last time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal threat. It was a deed transfer. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice calm enough to freeze water, "you are mistaken. You do not own the house on Oak Street. You haven't owned it for 5 years." My father blinked, confusion warring with his panic. "What are you talking about? I live there. It is my house." I held up the document. "Do you remember when the bank was about to foreclose in 2019? You were 3 years behind on payments. You were going to lose everything. Then a company called Phoenix LLC stepped in. They bought your debt. They paid off the arrears. And in exchange, you signed over the deed and agreed to a leaseback arrangement where you paid nominal rent." He nodded slowly, remembering the miracle that had saved him. "Yes, Phoenix LLC. They are investors. I pay them every month." I took a step closer, closing the distance between us. "I am Phoenix LLC." The silence that followed was heavier than the handcuffs clicking on my brother's wrists. "I formed the company solely to save you from homelessness without bruising your fragile ego. I bought the house. I paid the taxes. I fixed the roof when it leaked last winter. You have been living in my property, paying rent to me, thinking you were the king of the castle. But you were just a tenant." My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the document, then at me, realizing that the daughter he called useless had been his landlord for half a decade. So his permission meant nothing. He had no authority to pledge the house because it was never his to pledge. And since we are discussing tenancy, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I filed a motion this morning with the county clerk. Due to criminal activity on the premises and failure to pay rent for the last 3 months, Phoenix LLC is exercising its right to immediate eviction. The sheriff will be there at 8 a.m. tomorrow to change the locks. You have tonight to pack. Anything left behind will be hauled to the curb." I turned to Agent Miller, who was watching the exchange with a grim nod. "Take them away. The house belongs to me, and I am cleaning it out." The sound of the handcuffs' ratchet mechanism locking into place was the loudest thing in the room. It was a mechanical finality that severed the tie between Marcus and Tiffany far more effectively than any divorce lawyer could have. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and the flashing of blue police lights bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. Tiffany stared down at her wrists. The cold steel pressed against her skin and clashed violently with the gold Cartier bracelet she had demanded Marcus buy her last month. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. This was not a social media scandal she could spin with a clever caption. This was federal prison. This was an orange jumpsuit. This was the end of her life. Her survival instinct kicked in with the ferocity of a cornered animal. She did not look at her husband with concern or solidarity. She looked at him with revulsion. She twisted her body violently, trying to put physical distance between herself and the man she had called her soulmate 5 minutes ago. "Wait!" she shrieked, her voice tearing through the ballroom. "You have to listen to me. I am a victim here. I am just a victim." She looked frantically at Agent Miller, her eyes wide and pleading. "I did not know what I was signing. I did not know it was illegal." Marcus turned his head slowly to look at her. He was stunned. His face was a mask of absolute betrayal. "Tiff," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing? We did this together. It was your idea." Tiffany recoiled as if he had struck her. "You are a liar," she screamed. She pointed a shaking finger at him, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of hatred. "He forced me to do it. He told me he would leave me if I did not help him get the loan. He is abusive. He is a manipulator. I just wanted to save my family. I did not know he was stealing identity. He made me practice the signature. I was scared. Look at him. He is the criminal, not me." The crowd watched in horrified fascination. The perfect couple, the king and queen of the evening, were tearing each other apart like rats in a sinking ship. There was no loyalty. There was no love. There was only the desperate, clawing need to survive at the expense of the other. Marcus stared at her, and something inside him broke. The illusion he had built his entire life around finally shattered. He had stolen for her. He had lied for her. He had destroyed his relationship with his sister for her. And in the moment of truth, she threw him to the wolves without a second thought. "You are a monster," Marcus said quietly, his voice dead. "You are the one who wanted the car. You are the one who wanted the party." "Shut up," Tiffany spat back, struggling against the agent holding her arm. "You are a broke, pathetic loser, Marcus. I should have never married you. I hope you rot in jail. You ruined my life." The agents shoved them toward the exit, forcing them apart. They were hauled out through the double doors, screaming insults at each other, their voices echoing down the hallway. I stood on the stage and watched them go. It was pathetic. It was ugly. And it was the most honest interaction they had ever shared. Their love was conditional on the money. And now that the account was overdrawn, the love was gone. It had been 3 days since the gala. 3 days of silence from the phone that usually rang with demands. But I knew the call was coming. The inevitability of it hung in the air like humidity before a storm. I was sitting in my office reviewing the final eviction notices for the house on Oak Street when my cell phone finally vibrated against the mahogany desk. The caller ID displayed Mom. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to feel the weight of the wait. I wanted her to wonder if I would answer at all. On the 5th ring, I picked up. "Nia." Her voice was unrecognizable. It was ragged, broken, and thick with tears. "Nia, please. You have to help us. I am outside the detention center. They set the bail. It is too high. They want $200,000 for Marcus and another 100 for Tiffany. We do not have it. Your father called the bank, but our accounts are frozen because of the investigation. They are going to keep him in there, Nia. They are keeping him in a cage with murderers and drug dealers. You have to post the bail. You are the only one who can." I swiveled my chair to face the window, looking out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city looked clean from up here. Orderly. "Just get him out, Nia," she sobbed, the desperation rising in her throat. We will pay you back, I promise. We will sell the furniture. We will do anything. Just bring your brother home. He is terrified. He is not built for this. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was still hot. No, Mom, I said softly. He isn't built for this. He was built for a life where other people cleaned up his messes. But the cleaning crew has resigned. What are you talking about? She shrieked, her sorrow turning instantly to anger. This is money, Nia. Just money. You have millions. You can write a check right now and end this nightmare. How can you be so cruel? He is your flesh and blood. I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave. I am glad you brought up cruelty. It reminds me of something. Do you remember the barbecue last month? The one where I wasn't allowed to eat? Do you remember what you said to me when I reached for a plate of the food I paid for? There was silence on the other end of the line. She remembered. I knew she remembered. You said charity cases eat last. I recited, savoring the words. You told me that people who contribute nothing should wait until the important people are fed. Well, I took that lesson to heart. I really thought about it. And I realized you were right. I have been wasting my resources on the wrong people. Nia, don't, she whispered. So this morning I made some changes. I continued, my voice cheerful and bright. I liquidated my emergency fund. I took that $200,000 you need so badly and I wired it to the Atlanta Children's Shelter. I set up a scholarship fund for kids who actually need a chance. Real charity cases, Mom. Not grown men who steal from their sisters. You gave it away, she screamed. You gave our money to strangers. It is not your money, I corrected her. It never was. And since you established the rule that charity cases eat last, I am afraid Marcus is at the back of the line. The very back. I hear the food in county jail is terrible, but at least it is free. He should be grateful. You are evil, she hissed. You are a devil. I am just a good student, Mom, I replied. I learned from the best. Then I ended the call. I blocked the number. I looked at the eviction notice on my desk, signed it with a flourish, and placed it in the outgoing mail tray. The line was closed. The kitchen was shut down. And for the first time in my life, I was full. The silence in the hallway was heavier than the antique mahogany furniture that used to crowd it. I walked across the hardwood floors, my heels clicking a sharp rhythmic beat that sounded like a countdown. This house had been a museum of my parents' pretenses, a place where appearances mattered more than the people living inside it. Now, it was just a shell. The walls, stripped of their expensive art and accolades, looked small. Dingy, even. It was amazing how much smaller a monster looked when you turned on the lights and cleared away the shadows. I ran my hand along the banister, checking for dust one last time, not out of habit, but out of a need to confirm that nothing of them remained. Mr. Henderson, the real estate attorney, stood by the kitchen island, a thick stack of documents spread out before him on the granite countertop. He looked nervous. People usually were when they witnessed the total dismantling of a family legacy. He cleared his throat as I approached. The buyers are eager to close today, Nia. They have the wire transfer ready pending your signature on the deed. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen, the weight of it insignificant compared to the burden I was shedding. I signed my name on the final line. The scratch of the ink on paper felt like a shackle snapping open. And the wire transfer instructions? Mr. Henderson asked, adjusting his glasses, looking for the account number I had not yet provided. As we discussed, I said, my voice steady and cool, echoing slightly in the empty room, directly to the scholarship fund I established. The Future Horizons Grant for Underprivileged Black Children. He paused, blinking in surprise, his hand hovering over his briefcase. The entire net proceeds, Ms. Nia. That is over $800,000. Your parents. Surely they could use a portion for their transition. I cut him off with a look that dared him to finish that sentence. My parents have exactly what they earned. This money is going to children who actually deserve a chance at a future. Children who need to know that their worth isn't conditional on their obedience or their image. This house was built on pride and exclusion. The money from it will build opportunities and inclusion. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and respect in his eyes, and initiated the transfer. The notification on my phone pinged moments later. It was done. The asset that had been my parents' pride and joy was now fuel for the very people they had spent a lifetime looking down upon. While the digital millions were moving through the banking system, a very different visceral reality was unfolding 10 miles away on the other side of the city. My parents stood on the cracked pavement of the East Side housing projects. The air smelled of exhaust, stale frying oil, and damp concrete, a far cry from the lavender and old money scent of their former gated community. They had 2 suitcases each. That was it. The rest of their possessions had been sold at auction to cover their outstanding debts and the legal fees from their failed vindictive attempts to sue me for control of the company. My mother, a woman who used to panic if a throw pillow was out of place, stared up at the peeling paint of the tower block with horror etched into every line of her face. She clutched her handbag as if it were a life preserver in a storm, her knuckles white. She looked out of place in her tweed coat, a relic of a life she no longer possessed. My father looked broken. His posture slumped. The arrogance finally drained out of him like water from a cracked vase. He tried to unlock the metal door to the lobby, struggling with the stiff, rusted mechanism that stuck in the cold. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly and dribbling a basketball, and my father flinched, pulling his coat tighter around himself. He was no longer the king of his castle. He was just another old man, with nothing to his name, anonymous and powerless. They dragged their luggage into the elevator that smelled of bleach and urine, the doors shuddering as they closed, sealing them into their new reality. The apartment awaiting them was a 1-bedroom unit with linoleum floors that curled at the edges and a view of a brick wall. There were no guest rooms. There was no study. There was just the undeniable claustrophobic truth of their consequences. I didn't go to see them settle in. I didn't need to witness their misery to know it was real. I walked out the front door of my childhood home and locked it for the last time. The click of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I dropped the keys into the realtor's hand. "It's yours," I said. I walked to my car, the sun hitting my face, warming skin that had felt cold for too long. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the past. The money from that sale would launch 100 dreams for kids who had been told they were nothing, just like I had been. But unlike me, they would have the resources to prove the world wrong from the start. My parents had built a legacy of silence and control. I had just liquidated it to build a legacy of voice and power. As I drove away, the rearview mirror showed only the road behind me getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. I turned up the radio and drove toward my own home, the one built on truth. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing the private foyer of my penthouse. I stepped inside, the cool marble soothing the soles of my feet even through my shoes. This silence was different. It was not the suffocating, dusty silence of the house I had just sold, the heavy quiet of secrets and judgments trapped in the wainscoting. This was the silence of altitude, of being above the noise, above the fray. I dropped my keys into the crystal bowl on the console table. The sound rang out like a bell, clear and bright, announcing my arrival to no one but myself. Home. Not a museum of expectations, but a sanctuary of my own making. I walked into the main living area, shedding my coat and letting it fall onto a chair. I didn't need to hang it up immediately. I didn't need to worry about coasters or the angle of the blinds. I owned this space, just as I now fully owned my life. The floor-to-ceiling windows were a wall of living art framing the city skyline as it began to wake up for the night. Millions of lights flickered into existence, a sprawling galaxy of ambition and life stretching out to the horizon. Somewhere down there in the dense grid of the city, my parents were unpacking their resentment in a cramped room that smelled of other people's dinners and industrial cleaner. Up here, the air was scrubbed clean, smelling only of the white lilies I bought for myself every Tuesday, and the faint, expensive scent of leather and potential. I moved to the kitchen island, the dark quartz cool under my fingertips. I scanned the room, waiting for the guilt to hit me. I had been conditioned for 30 years to feel guilty for my own existence, to feel responsible for their happiness. I waited for the pang of regret for selling their legacy, for stripping them of their status. But it never came. Instead, I felt a lightness so profound it was almost dizzying. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but this didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction, like snapping a dislocated bone back into place. It hurt, yes, but only for a second, and then came the overwhelming relief of function returning. I had taken the toxicity that had poisoned my bloodline for generations, the elitism, the cruelty, the conditional love, and I had transmuted it. I turned it into tuition checks, into textbooks, into chances for kids who had never been given one. I opened the wine fridge and pulled out a bottle of Cabernet. It was a vintage my father would have hoarded in his cellar for a decade, saving it to impress a guest he secretly despised. I didn't save it for an occasion. Being me, being here, being free, that was the occasion. The cork popped with a satisfying sigh. I poured a generous glass, the crimson liquid swirling, catching the reflection of the city lights like captured fire. Glass in hand, I walked toward the window, my reflection ghosting in the glass against the backdrop of the glittering metropolis. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She didn't look like the scared girl who used to hide in the library reading stories about orphans who found magic kingdoms, wishing she could find a door that led anywhere but there. I realize now that I didn't need a magic door. I just needed to walk out the front one and lock it behind me. I thought about the concept that had been weaponized against me my entire life. Loyalty, blood. They always told me blood was thicker than water. They used that phrase like a leash, choking me every time I tried to breathe on my own. But blood stains. Blood is messy. Water cleanses. Water sustains. I had chosen water. I had washed my hands of them. The people who would receive that scholarship money, the strangers who would build lives because I refused to hoard a legacy I didn't earn. They were my family now. The friends who stood by me when I had nothing but a vision and a terrifying amount of debt, they were my family. I turned slowly, facing the room, facing the camera, facing the millions of eyes that had watched this journey from the shadows. I stood tall, the silk of my blouse catching the ambient light. I raised the glass, the crystal stem delicate between my fingers, the weight of it grounding me. My eyes locked with the lens unwavering, piercing through the screen. They told me for years that family is blood, that you owe your life to the people who gave it to you even if they spend the rest of it trying to take it back piece by piece. I took a slow sip, the wine rich and complex on my tongue, savoring the taste of victory that belonged to no one but me. They were wrong. Family isn't whose DNA you share. Family isn't an obligation you inherit at birth like a debt you can never pay off. Family are the people who treat you with kindness when you have nothing to offer them but yourself. Family are the ones who help you build your wings, not the ones who clip them to keep you in their cage. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached my eyes, a smile that hadn't been seen in that old house for decades. So to the blood that binds us, no. I lifted the glass higher, a salute to the empty room, to the city, to the future that was wide open and waiting. To freedom. And to the family we choose. Cheers! I took a final drink as the lights of the city seemed to flare brighter, surrounding me in a halo of gold and neon. The screen faded to black, leaving only the echo of the toast hanging in the air, a final benediction on a life finally, truly begun. Nia's journey is a powerful reminder that biology is not a binding contract for abuse. We often cling to toxic relationships out of a misplaced sense of duty, believing that blood excuses cruelty. However, true family isn't defined by DNA, but by mutual respect, support, and kindness. Nia teaches us that reclaiming your power sometimes means burning the bridges that lead back to your pain. The ultimate victory lies not in bitterness, but in using your success to break generational chains and build a life defined by freedom, peace, and the people who truly help you soar. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice.